YouTube also is there going on? Going on? Okay, both. Om Parthaya Pratibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gradidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Radavarshinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marudastunnandi Divyastavaihi Vede Sangapadakramopaniषदे Gayantiyam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pasyendi Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidussurasuraganah Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We discussed the 21st verse, which is very important. Yo yam tanum bhaktaha saddhayarchidum ichchadi tasya achalam saddham tameva vidadhami aham. So, any person in any form, any devotee who seeks to worship God in whatever form he or she may like, but if that person has that unwavering Shraddha, so tasya achalam saddham, a word is used here, means with an adjective. Shraddha is the word, achala is the Visheshan adjective. If our faith, sincerity, dedication, all these together constitute what we call Shraddha, if it is unwavering, steady and steadfast, then you will reach the goal. Now that's a unique teaching of Vedanta. That's why Vedanta is interpreted by Vivekananda as the universal religion. It's not that you follow one particular religious tradition or you worship one form of God, one idea or concept of God as revealed in one book or a set of books according to one tradition. It's not that. Rather, it is the devotee's heart that really counts. As I mentioned when we discussed this sower of the seed parable, it is the condition of the soil that determines, that decides the effect of the seeds falling on the soil. Whether what kind of soil it is. It's fertile soil, then it becomes a plant, a tree, it bears fruit 1,000-fold. So, what is it that makes the soil fertile? So, Vedanta uses this word Shraddha. Now, we have to remember, it is something very interesting. You don't even have to think of a God whom you consider as a creator, sustainer, or the one who decides the destiny of our life. It's not, it is okay, it is perfectly justified, it is fully accepted, but it is not the only way to accept or to approach God. If you are a very good person, compassionate, level-headed, sincere, earnest, unselfish, who does and thinks and speaks only the right thing, has absolutely no harmful thought in his mind, can he reach God? That's the question. And Vedanta says, Lord Krishna says, he or she can reach God, irrespective of whether he or she belongs to any particular tradition or belongs to no tradition at all. I often give the example of Buddha because there is no greater or better known example of somebody who just asked you to be a good human being, live a good life. And then he says, you can reach the highest, the nirvana. So you find the eightfold disciplines of Buddha. It's just nothing but certain disciplines that will make you, that designed to help us to be a good human being with a samyak drishti, mean proper attitude, samyak vyayama, samyak ajiva, samyak sankalpa, samyak samadhi, any of these, proper thinking, proper concentration, proper way of living our life, livelihood, proper thoughts. If you have all this ready, then Buddha says you can reach the highest. That's exactly the idea here. Yo yam tanum bhakta. Lord Krishna is not at all particular that you or anyone should worship him. That's a very important point. Now remember, this may be interpreted in a totally different manner. Of course, it is being interpreted differently. I am not going to refer to those aspects. But Gita is so universal, so all accommodating, so all pervading in its scope and reach. Now next one, 22nd is Sataya Shraddhaya Yuktaha Tasya Aradhanam Mayaiva Vihidan Hitan. A person who is endowed with that kind of Shraddha, that kind of proper attitude. May I ask you one question? You can all hear properly? If you don't mind, because we were facing problems. I want one. Everything is okay? Fine, thank you. So, yes, that's right, thank you. So, what is mentioned now? If a person has got that kind of Shraddha, this Shraddha anyone can have. Anyone can have. Any person who thinks, well, is there something beyond this everyday life of eating, clothing, having a good home, or having all the wonderful things of this world? Is there something beyond? Is there something higher, another meaning, another relevance, another option or possibility in life? Then we think of this unwavering steadfastness. So, endowed with that kind of Shraddha, that person, such a devotee, he engages in the worship of that, and with that kind of total dedication. And then what happens? He gains his desires. Now, of course, this is what we are going to discuss later. There are two types of worship that are implied here. One is, you have this sublime Shraddha, unwavering faith, and you look upon God as one transcendental reality. You don't want anything empirical. You don't want any earthly enjoyments or pleasures. That is the most exalted approach. Another approach is, there are people, and in all traditions you find, we sometimes think of God as somebody who will listen to this particular prayer, and if I do a particular offering, he will listen to me, he will fulfill my desires. All this happens, you know. And Lord Krishna says, suppose you pray to one God or goddess, or maybe in Hindu tradition, in the polytheistic traditions, and also in Greek mystery religions, you find many gods. Is polytheism, different ideas of God. So this will be, and this should be understood in that background. but it has got a wider meaning also. You can see, to give, I shall try to explain this in the context of Hinduism. If you go to Hindu temples, you find different deities. Vedanta and the highest Hindu philosophy tells you that all these different deities are different expressions of the same ultimate transcendental reality. But this is not often understood by everyone. So you find those who want wealth will worship Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, so to speak. Like that, goddess of learning, Saraswati. These are all, I'm not extending the list. The idea is, to whomever you praise and whomever you worship, all that worship will come to me, and if you get a result, I am the one who gives all the results, because behind the polytheism, behind the plurality, behind the this idea of different gods and goddesses, there is one absolute reality. And I should tell you, I should take special care to mention one important thing. The oldest document of Hinduism, Hindu philosophy, Hindu culture, Hindu spirituality is Rigveda, Samhita. And Yajurveda and Samaveda are mostly, many of the mantras are taken from Rigveda, Samhita, Atharvaveda also. So Rigveda Samhita is considered to be the oldest, the most ancient document of human pursuit of the transcendental. In this Rigveda Samhita you find many hymns, dedicated to different deities, Indra, Varuna, Agni, Soma, and so on. Now, we have an inscription in our temple here. That inscription tells you, Ekam Sat Vipra Bhagudha Vadanti. Reality is one, but sages and wise people define, understand, call that reality by different names. The full verse is this: Indram Mitram Varunam Agni Rahu Adho Divyasa Suparno Garutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti Agnim Yamam Matarishwanamahu. This is the full verse from the Rigveda Samhita. The third one is inscribed here, which says the reality is one, but sages call it by different names. This is the essence of Hindu polytheism. So there are different hymns in Rigveda Samhita. In each of these hymns you find it begins with a polytheistic idea, but then it ends with a monotheistic conclusion, and then if you have a close look at the evolution of Hindu godhead in the Rigveda Samhita, you find an evolution from pantheism to pantheism to monotheism, polytheism to monotheism to monism. These are five levels of evolution of godhead in Hinduism. Pantheism, there are many verses which equate this nature, its sublimity, its grandeur, its mystery, its indescribability. So it is equated to nature. You can find an example of this you find in Thoreau's writings. Walden, you find as he moves from place to place, admiring the grandeur and beauty of the trees and valleys and mountains. You can find a glimpse of this, and you find some of these in the ancient American religious traditions also. And then there is pantheism, where they believe that there is, behind every natural phenomenon there is an underlying immanent reality. And then there is this polytheism. I mean, different natural forces are controlled and regulated by one divine entity. Then this monotheism, there is one supreme presiding divine reality. But beyond all that, there is monism, which is Advaita, which means all these various forms, whether somebody in African country, in their ancient tradition, they have one idea of God. In American, old Aztec, Mayan, Incan, they have another idea of God. Or maybe in ancient Greece or Rome, they have different idea of God. Or maybe in India, they have altogether entirely different idea of God. So all these are real because these are all different approaches towards the transcendental supreme reality. But the reality is one. And as we evolve in our own spiritual life, as we become more and more pure, more and more compassionate, more and more humane, then our understanding, our realization of this transcendental supreme reality becomes clear and clear, and eventually at the end of it, you find this reality is within all of us, it is all pervading, and as we reach the highest degree of experience, you find it is an impersonal, transcendental, indescribable, non-definable, absolute reality. This is the essence of Advaita. Those of you who may get away with this idea, this is some kind of Oriental, Hindu, Vedantic idea, you are totally mistaken. You find, of course, I have quoted a lot from Eckhart, but there is another great, he was one of the most prominent figures in the German idealistic movement. After Kant, Immanuel Kant, maybe the next most prominent figure is Johann Gottlieb Fichte. My pronunciation may not be accurate in German, but he was a great German idealist. What he says is, being is absolutely single, not manifold. There are not several beings, but only one being. The obvious truth of this statement must be clear to anyone who can really think. So what he says, to anyone who can think, of course that is the ultimate that a German idealist can perhaps articulate, because maybe a Shankara will say, as you live a pure life, as you evolve, and of course he may consider this idea of reincarnation and law of karma, as you move from one life cycle to another life cycle, as you take an ascent in your own evolution, what happens? You will realize this. But Johann Gottlieb Fichte says, to anyone who can think, maybe you cannot say any thinking person will accept his view. I don't think so. It is a matter of spiritual evolution. Anywhere in any tradition you can find. Only being is, on no account is anything which is not being or which lies beyond being. So, what of course he used the word capital letter B. Now, this is precisely what you find in the writings of Eckhart. Of course, there are differences. Eckhart's idea of the absolute reality is not exactly the same as in Advaita, because he talks about he mingles with the highest devotion, which Shankaracharya also does, but from a different emphasis. But I am not going to those details. The main point what I meant to say is this Shraddha, this unwavering steadiness, this purity, if anyone can possess, he can directly knock at the doors of the highest spiritual truth. Vedanta will tell you, you will one day reach that goal, if not in this life, in the next life. That's why earlier we discussed this in the 6th chapter. If you know, Lord Krishna says, prapya punyakudam lokan ushitva shashwati samaha Shuchinam Simadam Gehe Yoga Brashto Bhijayate. That says, Athava Yoginam eva Kule Bhavadi Dhimatam Edadhi Durlabhadaram Loke Janma Yadi Drisham. So the first category of people who are evolving stage by stage from life cycle to life cycle, there are still some sublime desires are still left to be fulfilled. They will be born in a family. Suchinam Simadam Gehe. They will be born in a family where they will have all the positive, appropriate situations and conditions will come to them. As Christ said, you know the kingdom of God and everything will be added unto him, it says, something like that. So as you evolve in spiritual life, if you have done a lot of spiritual practice, then one day you will have all your desires fulfilled, and then you will get a wisdom when you will be able to transcend desires. You will not have any more desire. Such persons will be born in another family. Athva yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam. Those who are still highly evolved will be born in the families of ascetics, great spiritual teachers, where they will automatically realize the highest truth, the highest destination. This is the idea behind. So that's how this Shraddha, this unwavering steadiness evolves and develops in our mind. So that is the idea behind. Now we are 23rd verse. Antavattu phalam tesham tabhavat yalpamedhasam devan mapi. Now here Lord Krishna says, but the result, the fruit that these people get, suppose some people, well, they don't want anything like enlightenment. Buddha wanted enlightenment. So he left a kingdom behind and went to Buddhgaya and sat under the tree, and years of meditation followed and he became a Buddha. Not everybody is of that type. There are others who have very limited understanding, a very limited understanding of who God is. So you find people pray to God to help them in fighting their enemies, or people pray to God maybe for small things, not necessarily spiritual ideas. What Lord Krishna says is, it is okay, but they will take a long time to reach the higher levels of evolution. So they are men of little understanding. Alpamedhasa means their understanding of spiritual life is very, very lopsided. What happens, they worship different deities and they reach the goal accordingly. They cannot think of total surrender, prapatti or sharanagati. We already discussed this earlier. They cannot think of that. If they really want the highest wisdom, then they won't think of asking for anything else. But they have not reached that level of spiritual evolution to ask for the highest spiritual enlightenment. Even if God appears before them, they won't ask for the highest. They will ask for mundane things. You should remember, Lord Krishna doesn't condemn them. Earlier we mentioned Artho, Jijnasur, Artharthi, Jnani. 4 types of people turn to God. Those who have a problem, they turn to God. Those who want something, turn to God. They are just curiosity, they also do. And of course the most enlightened one. So those who turn to this higher reality to fulfill a lower desire, they are not bad, but they only belong to the kindergarten level of spiritual evolution. That's the idea behind. But we have to remember, if a person has got Shraddha, the highest Shraddha, then the result is immediate. That point was made earlier. You should remember this, the early verse we mentioned. Achalam Shraddha, we used this, yo yam tanum bhakta shraddhaya chudimichhadi tasya achalam shraddham tameva vidadhami aham. Those who have got the highest Shraddha, highest steadfastness, they get the immediate result. The examples you can find the great mystics or different traditions you can find. How does it happen? Because they have this highest Shraddha. We should remember the highest Shraddha doesn't come all of a sudden. If you have a candle in front of you, you can strike a match and the whole dark room gets illumined. It's just a matter of split second. If you have got matchstick, you can light a candle and in a split second you can remove darkness. It's an instant, it happens instantly. But it takes time for you to prepare a candle. Somebody has to prepare a candle. You should know where it is kept. You should bring it, and then you have to get a matchstick, matchbox. All these require some efforts. So our spiritual evolution that takes innumerable life cycles correspond to the effort involved in preparing and manufacturing the candle. So you switch on the electric switch, the light comes and the darkness goes away. But we should remember, you should know if it is totally dark, you may not know where the electric switch is situated. So you should go and get a flashlight. And then you should know where, you should find out where the electric switch is located. Then you should switch on. So there is an effort behind, but once the effort is complete, then the result is instant. And that process is called Shraddha. That's an important word used in Vedantic tradition. It has got a, Swami Vivekananda used this word, and then he says it is a word that he cannot translate. That's what Vivekananda said. The word Shraddha he could not translate. You have to write one book to make the meaning clear, because the whole process of human enterprise, our evolution, a number of values. But remember, there are certain things that we immediately catch, though we may not understand. We may not understand, but we will be able to make sense of it. You may not be able to explain in words, but you will be able to make sense of it. Many of the highest things, some of the most beautiful things in life, whether it is harmony, beauty, love, compassion, we may write books, but it's something that automatically we are able to connect with, though we may not be able to explain or define it. That's right. Shraddha is something like that. Now we will go to the 24th verse, which is, of course, maybe no, 23rd. We will finish 23rd. 24th is very important. Avyaktam vyaktimapannam manyante mam abuddhayaka param bhavam ajanando mamavayam anuttamam. It's a very, very famous verse. And it has got a lot of spiritual significance also. Avyaktam vyaktimapannam. Avyaktam means something that is abstract, subtle, which is not manifest, that we cannot empirically explain or define or understand. But once we evolve in spiritual life, we immediately will realize it, though we may not be able to fully define it. So, my true Sarupa is Avyaktam. And this Avyaktam is it is universal, it is impersonal, it is transcendental, it is unmanifest, it is cosmic. That is the true nature of God, the highest idea of God. That highest idea of God is brought down by us depending upon our own evolution, our own spiritual evolution. The highest devotee looks upon God as an all-pervading, transcendental reality who is accessible to everyone, who is a universal principle. But the same great idea, like let us say, often I gave a lecture some time back, 2 lectures actually, Christ the universal and Christ the historical. Now, if you limit a great spiritual person to an historical event, or like Krishna or Shankaracharya, Ramakrishna, anybody, any great spiritual teacher, you just limit them to a historical event, their life or their teachings. Actually, we are limiting the scope, the dimension of their personality and their teachings. All great spiritual epoch makers have a universal dimension that goes beyond the personal, beyond the historical, beyond the anthropological, and beyond the sociological. Now, Lord Krishna says the true dimension of God is cosmic, infinite, impersonal, transcendental, not manifest in names and forms. What is manifest in names and forms is historical, but the same historical spiritual teacher as a universal personal dimension that goes beyond the borders of time, culture, nationality. That's why succeeding generations for hundreds of years, for maybe thousands of years, spiritual teachers continue to be the sources of inspiration. When you bring them to the historical level, we are actually bringing them to a contemporary event limited by time and space and causation. Born in a particular place, have their human form, and then certain activities are attributed to them. And Lord Krishna in the Gita goes on reminding us again and again that though there is nothing wrong in our understanding of the cosmic, of the impersonal, in terms of the personal and non-cosmic, but should remember there is a higher possibility that we realize as we continue evolving in our own spiritual life, in our individual spiritual life, we will understand this personal or this finite historical spiritual persons have a stature and personality that goes beyond historical. It is universal. That's what Shankaracharya writes. Avyaktam aprakasham vyaktim apannam prakasham gatam idanim manyante mam nitya prasiddham isharam abhi santam abuddhayaha avivekinaha param bhavam paramatma surupam ajananda avivekino mama avyayam vyayarahidam anuttamam niradishayam madiyam bhavam ajanando manyante idi arthaha. That's what it says. Lord Shankaracharya, of course, it's an interesting paragraph. I can explain this so you won't miss anything. What Shankaracharya says is, this absolute reality is the universal, the infinite, the cosmic. When you think of a great spiritual teacher, a great spiritual idea, you should think of the abstract, not somebody or something limited by time. So Shankaracharya says this is a non-dual absolute truth, but because people are not endowed with the highest spiritual wisdom, so he uses the word avivekinaha, means those who, in meaning is those who have not reached the highest state of evolution. What happens? They don't know this cosmic dimension of the absolute reality, so they understand the absolute only in terms of the relative. You should remember, I should remind this again and again, because otherwise it will be terribly misunderstood. These ideas are always to be understood in the context of the law of rebirth. Not one life and one chance. Every person will have the opportunity to realize the highest. So if a person doesn't have the highest spiritual wisdom now, to understand the cosmic dimension, the universal dimension of the Lord, one day in another life cycle, sometime later, he or she will realize the supreme truth. If you don't understand this in the light of the important principle of law of karma and reincarnation, you will get away with the impression that God is denying, closing his door in front of certain people, calling them avivekinaha, means they are not fully evolved. Everyone will evolve, as we already read in the 6th chapter. As we evolve in spiritual life, we will have a higher and higher existence, higher and higher life in the succeeding cycles of life. And eventually, one day, we will realize this highest supreme truth. So that should be understood very clearly. Otherwise, if you take these ideas without remembering the principles of law and karma and reincarnation, then we will get to the impression that God is denying the highest realization. He is saying that this highest realization is not possible to certain people, calling them avivekinaha. Not at all. They also will attain viveka in some higher life in future, and they will reach the highest destination. That is the important point to be kept in mind in this context. Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavritah means this cosmic dimension, this highest spiritual reality, this dimension, it is not known to everyone, and the dynamics of how it remains unrevealed, unseen or invisible to those who are not fully evolved, that is discussed here. So yogamaya samavritah. So maya is a word used. Maya should be understood the principle of something not visible, not clearly seen, something is veiled or concealed, and therefore in its place something else is projected. It's called avarana and vikshepa. So maya, in a way, it has got different dimensions, different meanings, but what it means here is the highest dimension of the supreme reality, the universal dimension, the infinite dimension, is not always clearly seen by everyone. Why? Because it is veiled. Yogamaya samavrita. Samavrita means concealed or covered by this maya. So mudhoyam nabhijanadi loko mam ajam avyayam. Actually, the word here, the first person is, I is used here. I here doesn't mean the individual Krishna who was born historically as the son of Devaki and Vasudeva. That is the unique contribution of Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya takes Lord Krishna out of the tiny little historical context. Somebody who lived, he lived for a long time. He was a great man, great philosopher, great seer, great diplomat. He was a great saint and sage, and he was considered to be an incarnation during his lifetime. But still, the individual human being existing as a visible human being is limited by the dimension of the visible physical personality. And Shankaracharya will tell you the real implication goes beyond that. It is Atman or Brahman that is implied by the word I. So that should be understood here. I am not manifest at all. I here means Atman. That's why. So what happens? But the world is deluded. So they don't understand me as the unborn, Ajam, and Avyayam, the immutable. My true dimension as Atman, as Brahman, is the transcendental, eternal, immutable, birthless and deathless. That is ever existing, eternal. That is my true dimension. But people don't fully understand that. Actually, what happens, if you find all problems in the name of religion may be rooted in the idea of understanding that great religious teacher or spiritual teacher in association with his own specific socio-anthropological aspects. But Lord Krishna here used the word I in the sense Atman. So that's why it is Shankaracharya's genius that takes Lord Krishna out of his own tiny historical context. So you can find Yaya Yogamaya Samavurdam Mam Loko Na Abhijanati, he says. And then he says, Veda Aham, the next verse of course says, Veda Aham Mam tu Vedana Kaschana Madbhaktam Matsharanam Egam Muktva Mattattva Vedana Bhava Eva Namam Bhajade. Because Mattattva Vedana Bhava means they don't clearly understand the infinite dimension. So if a person doesn't understand a spiritual teacher in the context of the infinite role, the infinite significance of his teachings, and the universality, the eternal nature, eternal significance of his teachings, then we may put that spiritual teacher within a more social, historical context. Shankaracharya in his commentary takes Lord Krishna out of his historical context and interprets him as Atman, as Brahman. That's why Gita is so universal. Anyone can read Gita. It's not necessarily linked to one particular religion. It's a universal spiritual classic. So I hope many of these teachings can be elaborated more clearly during interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions that will help me to answer, to clarify many points. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Maharaj.
Yeah.
This is Mark.
Yeah.
The question I like to ask is about the idea of a spiritual path.
Yeah.
I've read different ideas about this. Some people say that divinity is everywhere, being is everywhere, so it's not necessary. There is really no path. Others say the spiritual path does exist and that it is necessary for an aspirant to walk a spiritual path to reach the highest. I'd like to know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, could you repeat the question once more? Clearly.
The idea of a spiritual path.
Yeah, spiritual path. Yeah.
Yeah, and is there actually something considered a spiritual path, or a lot of people say that there's no such thing as a spiritual path because and that it's not really necessary to travel between one point and another point on a path to reach the highest. I was wondering what your ideas were about that.
I shall. Thank you. Very, very, very profound question. Now, if you observe that person who tells you that divinity is everywhere, so you don't have to follow any path, if the person is an embodiment of the highest spiritual characteristics, compassion, wisdom, understanding, then he doesn't have to go to a temple or a church. You are right. Because that state is the highest state. You can find in this, I give this example, you can find in the writings of many of the mystics and Hindu great saints, you find there are many saints who didn't visit temples on a regular basis. They walked about as wandering men and women. The whole Hindu mythology is full of the stories. Well, the only example that comes to my mind is again the pilgrim in the way of a pilgrim, that classical work. This man was traveling all the way from Kutsk to all the way he wanted to go to Jerusalem, and he just walking in search of it. He realized the Jesus prayer, continues his journey. He didn't have a home, and he could identify his whole life in the presence of Christ. I'm just giving an example. He's not a typical churchgoer or a believer in God. So also in Hindu tradition you find not necessarily priests, but the great, what we call them avadhutas, paramahamsas, who moved from place to place, and they, wherever they stayed for some days, people will ask them questions, they will give answers, and they will move on. Now, they didn't go to a temple or observe puja or rituals, nothing, because they didn't feel the need to do that. So we should always remember the problem with Johann Gottlieb Fichte is he was just an idealistic philosopher. Unlike Eckhart, Meister Eckhart was a great mystic who did a lot of prayer, who was a Dominican priest, and he spent his whole lifetime in that. But Fichte was just a thinker, but he somehow connected this idea. That's the main difference you should remember. Eckhart, Meister Eckhart was, he lived like, we call avadhuta, the word is used in Indian context. He didn't worry about whether he was accepted by the hierarchy, the church hierarchy or not. Now that's the main thing. Now the point is, if a person who tells you that divinity is everywhere, so I don't have to do anything, I can do whatever I want. Remember, that's a big trap. It is a precipice. It's a big trap. It's a mental trap. There are two aspects to this. One could be a deliberate self-deception and attempt to deceive others. Another possibility is the person may totally misunderstand that the whole idea is just an idea, a concept. He may lose the spiritual, the real life touch, of this idea. He may look upon this just as a concept. So that's an important point to remember. So, if that person is an embodiment of all great spiritual qualities that we normally find personified in the great religious teachers, spiritual teachers of the world, then that person doesn't need go to a church, or he doesn't have to read Bible because he living the Bible. His church is everywhere. He's living the Bible. So he doesn't have to go and confess. That's an important thing to remember. So for a beginner, a beginner has to go to a primary school, kindergarten, or wherever he wants to learn the basic lessons. And then of course he won't have to study the alphabet like a kindergarten child. So the important point, remember, spiritual life, the biggest problem in spiritual life is when we read about the highest ideas, we often fail to recognize that it is not an idea or a concept. We are not traveling from one lower concept to another higher concept. The journey takes place through our own life, our own emotional life, of life in terms of emotions and feelings and attitudes. If a person feels that kind of, like a Buddha, if he feels, he doesn't have to go to any place of worship. Divinity is everywhere. So that is an important, in fact they are far superior to the regular church goers or temple goers. The highest spiritual men and these great saints who can feel the divinity, the sanctity of a holy shrine everywhere, and they can, because they can feel the presence of the divine everywhere, they don't have to follow any particular path. No, you are right, but others have to follow. And as they follow this path, according to Vedanta, after several life cycles, he will reach the point where he won't feel the need to read a holy book to become a holy person. He doesn't have to go to a holy place to feel holiness. Everywhere he feels holiness. So Shankaracharya is, as you know, he is the greatest philosopher of India, greatest Advaita philosopher. He is also the author of the most exquisite devotional poetry. And one poetry says, when you reach a point wherever you are moving, your movement is like circumambulation. Every word becomes a sacred mantra. Every thought becomes meditation or samadhi. If you reach that stage, then you don't need temples, books, or anything. Till then we need all this. So you should be very careful. The main problem is people will always interpret this in terms of ideas and concepts. We are not talking about ideas and concepts. We are talking about the journey in our emotional life. That's what we are talking about.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes.
Swamiji, my name is Regina, and I have a question.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
It's about that scenario you said for preparing the candle and the matches. I'm assuming that is all the effort that we're trying to make, reading good books, listening to Vedanta talks, and meditating, and all of those effort that we're trying to make to get our minds ready. But along the way, and I realize it takes multiple lives, I understand that, but within a single life, if you're consciously making the effort, not a certain time of the day, but continuously for as long as you can, and you're aware of it, you're always making that effort. How do we know that we're on the right path? How would I know that the effort I'm trying to make is heading in that direction?
Yeah. In spiritual life, the humblest effort, even the first step, if we make, if that gives us a feeling of inner contentment, joy, then that's a proof that we are on the right track. Whether reading a holy book, any book of praying or meditation, or maybe doing something good, something noble, if by any of these practices, if we feel a kind of inner joy, inner contentment, inner serenity, which is more lasting than any kind of satisfaction that you get in the empirical worldly life, then it means we are on the right track. Because spiritual practices, spiritual disciplines give us a peculiar kind of inner contentment, inner joy, a sense of higher, a sense of meaning and sense of relevance of life and activities. If we feel that, then there is a proof that we are on the right track. Everyone can feel that. Even when you go and pray sincerely, at least for the short time, you may feel a great inner joy, inner contentment. It may not last long, but still you get it out of the prayer or any good deed, noble deed. Well, that's a proof that that is the real thing, that is something that is that actually will have a feeling of inner joy and contentment. So that's the real proof.
I have. Thank you for your response. But sometimes there is this feeling that it's not enough. I should be doing more, and I should be doing more. And the contentment doesn't come. So that seems to be some sort of a, I don't know how to explain this, but there's always this feeling that because you read so much and there's just so much information, just when you think, okay, I got this down, you read some more and you hear some more and you say, oh, wow, I need to do some more now. So that it just seems like it's a bottomless pit of effort. Am I on the right path, even thinking along those lines, or am I missing something here?
No, then you should continue. Now nobody needs to think that he or she is responsible for fixing all the problems of the world. We need not feel that way. Frequently we feel, oh, I should do so much for the whole humanity. I can do and I should do a lot for others. That is not needed. In fact, that is a very unspiritual attitude, that we are supposed to fix the problems of the world, that we are so expected to solve some of the important problems the world is facing. That is a very unspiritual attitude. In fact, that can create only more irritation and discontent. Instead of that, whatever is possible, we do with full mind, with the full Shraddha, full a sense of sanctity and sacredness. That's very important. A sense of sanctity and sacredness. These two qualities will naturally generate contentment. We should never ever imagine that we should do a lot to help the world. The world is that is a very, very dangerous situation that can be the cause of many anxieties and bitterness. Instead of that, there being many greater people far greater than us who try to solve the problems of the world. The world continues to be what it is for thousands of years. So why should we undertake, shoulder on we take the responsibility on our shoulders to solve the problems of the world? We don't have to do. Whatever is possible for us, then we do our best. And also for our own spiritual progress, meditation, reading and all that. Then we will have contentment. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you for the questions. Okay. If any more questions, I will conclude. Yeah.
Swami, I have one more.
Yeah.
Does a seeker or an aspirant seeking the highest truth need a preceptor or a teacher or a guru in order to realize that truth?
Generally, there is, without a teacher, there are two aspects to this. One is the journey in the world of ideas. The other one is the journey in the world of our own spiritual disciplines. For spiritual disciplines, we need a teacher. If a person, on the other hand, feels that he doesn't require one, and he practices his own prayers or reading holy books or whatever it is, and out of that if he derives a great joy and contentment, then no problem. There is no need. Yeah, that's all right. It's an individual choice. Yeah. So thank you for the questions. We had a good session. Thank you. Yeah, namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Swami Ji.
Thank you. Yeah.
We love you.
Yeah, thank you.